Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. How are you? Everybody okay?
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. I am a little bit under the weather. How are you, Doctor?
Waalaikumsalam. Not really.
Huh? Not really?
Yeah.
What's the problem?
Just one of my relatives got
Apa dia?
my relative got diagnosed with COVID. So
Ya ke? How is it? How is he or she?
He's not. He's like the symptom, like he experienced the symptoms and everything. So
yeah. If I think if we get treatment earlier, that's better.
No, luckily he got treatment earlier. So
problem is some people, you already have the symptom, and then after it's getting serious, then only we go to the hospital. If we get early treatment, inshallah, I think it's good. Because the recovery rate is very high for us, almost more than 90%. So just pray for him or her.
Thank you.
Okay, we will continue from where we left last time on the chapter number 12, number 11. We were talking about the tax, the burden of the tax, or the incidence of the tax. I think where we left was, we were looking at the statutory, okay, which is the legal incidence. That means the government imposed the tax or assigned the tax legally or by law to one party, either the seller or the buyer, or the firm or the consumers. And that would be the example that we were looking at. The example that we're looking at, the tax is imposed on the firm or the seller. Now, the economic incidence is the incidence that will be determined by the market. That is related to the behavior, okay, the change of behavior of the economic agents. If the firm is imposed the tax, what the firm does or the seller does will increase the price by the amount of the tax. So what we saw was the supply will shift to the left, and therefore what we see, the burden of the tax or the incidence of the tax will be shared by the firm as well as the consumers. So that was what we were looking at. And this is what we call the backward, I think backward, forward. I put a lupa. Backward shifting. Backward shifting. I think it's called the backward shifting. The firm is imposed the tax, and then I think it's called the backward. I'm going to check the term, it's either backward or forward. Backward shifting. What we mean is this: the firm, okay, is imposed the tax. So the statutory incidence, the tax is on the firm, all right, or the sellers. Now, what the sellers does or the firm does will increase the price. Okay, increase the price by the tax. So therefore, we see that the supply is shifting to the left or decrease by the amount of the tax. So therefore, depending on the supply and the demand, or given the supply and the demand function, the tax, all right, would be transferred to the consumers. Not the whole tax, at least, okay, at least some, okay. some portion of the tax, some portion of the tax would be transferred to consumers. So we call this backward shifting. I am assigned the tax as a seller. I increase the price. So the interaction in the market, given the supply and demand, I transfer a portion of the tax to you, okay, to the consumers. Now, how much is the portion? We do not know. You know, can be, that will be depending on the elasticities of the supply and demand. It can be, you know, half, it can be a quarter, it can be zero, right? But at least some. So that, of course, will be depend on the elasticities of the demand and the elasticities of supply. That one we will look at later. All right? Okay, good. So now let's go back to the diagram where you have the imposition of the tax on the firm and the price is increased. And as we know, the price will go up by, you know, from P0 to P1. And that P1 is the price the consumers pay, and P2 is the price the firm will receive. And the difference between those prices is the tax. Now we can break out the tax into a few, or we can break out the effect of the tax, right, into a few parts. Number one, when you pay the tax, that tax or the tax revenue from the sale of the good, okay, will be going to whom? Will be going to the government. So the government will receive tax revenue. And the tax revenue will be equal to this part here. Right? So that is the tax revenue. Call it G. Yeah, I think G. So the tax revenue will be equal to the tax T multiplied by Q1. Q1 means the equilibrium after the tax, the equilibrium quantity after the tax. So I'm going to write it down. Number one, okay? The government, G, the revenue, okay? Revenue. This is upside down. Okay, the government revenue from the tax. So the tax revenue, call it G, all right, is equal to the tax multiplied by the Q1. So Q1 is the equilibrium Q after tax. So if you look at the example that you have here, the tax was equal to how much? The tax to equal to the tax. The tax is equal to 115, 90 cent. Berapa sen itu? 115 tolak 90 cent. 10, 15, 25 cents. Okay. The tax is 25 cents. So the tax is equal to 25 cents. Yeah. If you go by the example in the book, the 25 cents tax, and suppose the Q1 and Q0, dia ada bagi tak? Q1, Q0. Tak ada. Q1, Q0, not given. So, suppose the Q0 here is 1,500. And let's say this is 1,000. So the tax in dollars, because we use the book, the unit is dollars. So the tax will be $0.25 multiplied by 1,000. All right, so that will be the tax revenue. So it will be $250. Okay, so that is the tax revenue. Now, number two, if you break out the tax revenue, of course, the tax revenue would come from the market, okay? Come from the firm and the consumers. So if you look at the tax revenue, they are based on, on the burden of the tax on the consumers and the burden of the tax on the firm. We can get the tax revenue burden. I mean, what do you call it? The breakdown of the tax revenue. That means the payment from the government, from the firm, and also the payment from the consumers. So if we go back to that thing, that G, okay, which is equal to T, and as we know, the T is equal to, I think I'm going to write down here, P1 minus P2, Q1. In other words, ni PC lah ni, PC minus PF, okay, times Q1. So in terms of the changes in the price, that will be equal to PC, I'm going to use PC lah, consumer price, minus P0 times Q1 plus P0 minus PF times Q1. So from here, we know the breakdown of the revenue. Who pay how much, all right? So that will be equal to, if you see the diagram again, the P1 minus P0, P1 minus P0 apa? 0.15. Okay, that is the burden of the tax on the consumers. So multiply by Q1 plus the burden of the tax on the firm, which is 1 minus 0.9 or 90 cents, that would be 0.10 times Q1. I think the Q1 we put the example. Q1 is 1,000. Okay, so here is 1,000, and that is 1,000. So total will be 150 plus 100. So total is 250. So from here, you will see here that is the burden or the share of the revenue, okay, of the consumers. And this is the share of the revenue of the firms. All right. And from, of course, we also already see that if you look at the tax, all right, 15 cents of the tax is equal to 25 cents. So PC minus P0 equal to 0.15. And then P0 minus PF is equal to 0.10. So therefore, out of 25 cents, 15 cents of the tax is burden on the consumers. And then 10 cents is the burden on the firm. So here, you can say the burden of the tax. Burden on the consumers. Okay, and this part here is the burden on the firms. So as we can see, higher amount of the tax is being paid by the consumers. That means consumers pay higher amount of the tax than the firms. Of course, that will depend on the elasticities of demand, which we are going to look afterwards. Okay, number 3. If you look back into the diagram, okay, go back to the diagram, we will see a welfare loss, or we call it excess burden. So this part here, that triangle, is the excess burden of the tax, the welfare loss. You move from a competitive equilibrium to a monopoly equilibrium. You will have excess, but you have a welfare loss. Okay, so similar here, you impose the tax. That means we move away from the competitive equilibrium, which is E0, to the after-tax equilibrium. Okay, therefore there will be excess burden in terms of the triangle. Excess burden is the welfare loss. Sometimes we call it welfare loss due to the tax. All right. Now, what is the excess burden? Now, the excess burden is the loss to the society. All right. So it's loss to the society beyond the revenue that is going to be paid by the market. So that's why you call it excess burden. It's the extra burden. Okay, extra burden or extra loss to the market. That means the firms and the consumers to the market beyond the revenue generated. In other words, we have the loss, okay, the loss to the society beyond the revenue that is collected by the government. So that is welfare loss. And it's not measurable in terms of dollars. I mean, the market doesn't reflect that. The market just give you, you charge the tax, we pay, and then the government get the revenue. But in fact, there is a welfare loss. Okay. Now, how do you measure that welfare loss? This welfare loss or this extra burden is measured by the loss in the consumer surplus and also the loss in the producer surplus. Now, this extra burden does not go to the government. Okay, doesn't go to the government. The tax go to the government, but that triangle doesn't go to the government, doesn't go to the government, and it is lost from the firms, okay, and lost from the consumers. So it going nowhere. Okay, nobody get it. The firm doesn't retain it. The consumers does not retain it, and it doesn't go to the government. So that's why you call it welfare loss or the excess burden of the tax. Okay. So now, if you look at the diagram, that triangle, we want to make the comparison between the loss in the consumer surplus and also the loss of the producer surplus. Now, let's go back to the diagram. Now, you look at the diagram. What is the consumer surplus? No, let's focus on the consumer surplus. What is the consumer surplus under the market equilibrium? That means before the tax, E0. Where is the consumer surplus? Kat mana consumer surplus? Anybody see? Okay, look at the equilibrium. Here is the equilibrium. Okay, that is
The
P0.
triangle.
Where is the triangle? You know the triangle? The consumer surplus?
The red color.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you hear that sound? Somebody is repairing the pipe, in front of my house. So sorry about that sound. Now, consumer surplus is this area, right? The area under your demand function up to the price, P0. Okay? So I'm going to draw again so that we can see the losses better. So I think I'm going to do it here. So if I draw it here, but this one is much more simplistic diagram. Okay, so you got S, and then this is our S1. You have your Q0, P0. All right, this is P1 or PC. Okay, and this is Q1. Now, before the tax, where is the equilibrium? So here I just look at the consumer surplus. Okay, equilibrium consumer surplus is what? Is that triangle. Sini, betul tak? You see that? That's consumer surplus. Okay. So call this A. Okay, before the tax, consumer surplus is equal to what? E0, P0, A. Okay. Now you tell me the border. Okay. After the tax, what is the new consumer surplus?
E1, P1A.
1P1A.
That's correct. Okay, you got E1, P1A. So you see that there is a loss in consumer surplus. All right, because C1, I mean, consumer surplus CS1 is less than CS. So as you can see, CS1 is less than CS. So there is a consumer, or there is a loss, okay, in consumer surplus. All right. Now, if you look at the loss in the consumer surplus, which is that area, the area what? Area P1, P0, P1, P0, E0, E1. Okay.
E0, E1.
You look at that consumer, the loss of the consumer surplus, that triangle. You label the area. Okay. Now, where do this loss in consumer surplus go to?
Part of it, I think, go to producer surplus, and the other one, the small triangle, will be the loss.
Good, not good. Good try. Okay. So you said that will go to the producers. Okay. If we go to the producer, we'll just go one day. I mean, we'll go to the producer maybe temporarily. All right. But permanently, where does it go to? Ultimately, where does it go to? We'll go to the producer, but maybe very short run. Ultimately, where does it go to? So in other words, we don't have
To the
to
consumer?
see, we don't have to say it's going to the producer. Where does it go
The
to?
government?
We go to the government. So that part, okay, that part, which is this rectangle, okay, will go to the government. So that is the government revenue, okay, from the consumers, of the consumers. Okay, so that triangle, that rectangle here, that goes to the government as revenue. Now, what about this part here? Okay, that part is lost. It doesn't go to the government, it doesn't go to the firm, and it lost from the consumers. So this is the excess burden. Okay, excess burden, that is the welfare loss to the consumers, okay, due to the tax. So this is called that part, okay, is called the excess burden to the consumers due to the tax. Okay, that is the part on the consumers. Any question? All right, good. So now we look at the firms. Where is the producer surplus? Now I call this B. Okay, I call that point B. Now before the tax, what is the producer surplus? Just give me the triangle. What triangle is the producer surplus before the tax?
Below P0, E0.
Yeah, below P0. So below P0.
The triangle P0, BE0.
So the producer surplus is B0, P0, I'm sorry, P0, B, E0. All right. So that is the producer surplus before the tax. Now, after the tax, the firm will get P2, or we call it PF. Okay. After the tax, what is the producer surplus now? Cepatlah, anybody?
B0, P2, E2.
Bukan, no. I'm asking about producer surplus. All right. Producer surplus after the tax. The producer surplus before tax is P0, B, E0. Betul lah tu? Okay. Now, after you impose the tax, equilibrium will go from E0 to E1. But the price that the firm will receive is P2. So now, what is the new producer surplus? Or the producer surplus after the tax?
P2, E1, B.
P2,
E1,
E1, okay?
B.
B. So this one, we shouldn't call it B1, I call it C. Okay? So P2, C, B. All right? So as we can see, the loss in the producer surplus is equal to what? Is equal to that area. Okay? So the loss of that producer surplus is equal to that area. But a portion of that loss in the producer surplus will go to the government as tax revenue. Now, what is the tax revenue that goes to the government from the producer surplus?
Rectangle.
That rectangle, P0, P2, or PF, C,
C.
okay, that part, that thing. I call this thing, call that point, we call that point D, D, okay? I put that point as D, okay, which I didn't put earlier, but I draw the rectangle. So that rectangle, okay, go to the government as tax revenue. P0, P2, C, D. And if you, as you can see, that portion there, okay, that portion, the rectangular portion, is the excess burden. All right, but that, of course, that is the part of the excess burden, which is the loss or in the producer surplus that doesn't go to the government. It doesn't go to the consumers. It is lost from the producers. Okay, so you do that thing. Okay, you do the same thing. You repeat as what we were doing here. Okay, before the tax, the producer surplus is P0, B, D. You know, after the tax, producer surplus is P2, B, C. Okay, and then the tax revenue from the firms will be P0, P2, C, D. Okay, and then that small rectangular or that small rectangle is the loss in the producer surplus. Okay, or the excess burden. Excess burden, which is the loss of the producer surplus. It doesn't go to anybody. So that is the excess burden. So the total excess burden is the loss in the consumer surplus, and the lower triangle is the loss in the producer surplus. So that's why you call it excess burden. It's the loss of consumer surplus and loss of producer surplus, which doesn't go anywhere. Okay, the government will only take that rectangle. So that is the excess burden of the tax. All right. So we call that excess burden due to the tax. So number berapa tadi? Number 3. Number 2, okay, you see the tax revenue, and then the tax revenue is being shared by the firms and the consumers, that will depend on, on the burden of each party. And then, as we can see, there is also an excess burden. So number 3, there is excess burden due to the tax. So for detail, look at the diagram, right? That's the diagram. So that is loss to the economy, the welfare loss to the economy. And that excess burden, we call it EB. If you look at the triangle, it's just equal to a half multiplied by the tax, okay? Multiplied by the change in the Q. So if you look at that diagram, okay, the triangle we can measure by the tax, okay, T, multiplied by the change in the Q, yeah, and then half because it's triangle. So that is how you measure the excess burden. For example, the excess burden here is equal to a half multiplied by $0.25, or if you want to convert into cent, becomes 25 cents. Then the change in the Q is Q1 minus Q0. So the change is the new Q minus Q0. So here you will get a negative value. So excess burden is negative, correct? Because after the tax, the Q1 will be less than Q0. So you will see the excess burden is negative. So that will be equal to, I think that Q1, Q2, so you can put here, half T Q1 minus Q0. All right. So if you put the value, that will be equal to 1,000 minus 1,500. So that is equal to 500. So if you multiply that by the values, berapa dapat? Kalau you have calculator, so you get a negative value. So that negative value indicate loss. Okay. All right. Any question? Good. Okay. And on top of that, of course, due to the tax, consumers will pay higher price from that was the basic thing that we did. So number 4, I think this one should be number 1 as well. Consumers, okay? Consumers pay a higher price, or we can say, we can say the market price has gone up. So the market price increases, and then the market Q decreases. Okay, I think this one should be the most basic one. Now the market price increases, we can break down into 2. Consumers pay higher price. Okay, and the firms will get lower price. Now, when we say lower price, higher price, that is relative to P0. Okay, that relative to P0. And of course, lower market quantity. So that is basic, okay, the basic effect of a tax on the market. So that will finish our discussion on the effect. Now, we're going to look at the effect of the elasticities of demand and the elasticities of supply. How does it affect? Because we were saying the burden of the tax on the consumers and on the firms is affected by the elasticities of the demand and the elasticities of the supply. Of course, there may be other factors, but we just want to look at the relationship between the two. And of course, that will contribute to the changes in the excess burden, and that will also change the contribution or the share of the government revenue by each party. All right. So let's look at that. So we look at the elasticities of demand. Okay. For now, we look at elasticity of demand, how it affects the incidence of the tax, and then how it affects excess burden, and how it affects the G distribution. Okay, of the okay. So what we do is this: we make a comparison between our base diagram. Okay, our base diagram will be like the first diagram that I draw. Will be something like this: the supply demand upward sloping. Okay, the supply demand upward sloping. Now we look at the demand function. The supply function we keep as it is. If the demand function now is more elastic or more inelastic, that will depend on what you are doing. If the demand is more inelastic, okay, how can you draw the diagram? I mean, how can you show it by the demand function? If the demand is more inelastic or the demand is more elastic, how does it show through the demand function? Katakan our demand function mula-mula macam ni je. Okay, relative to that demand function, if the demand is more elastic or more inelastic, how does it relate to this curve?
If inelastic, more flatter. If elastic, more steeper.
If it is elastic, more steeper.
More steeper, yes.
So, one way to do it, we keep our diagram at E0. Okay. So in elastic, steeper. Betul ke? After this we check. Okay. Elastic, dia steeper.
No, sir.
this
Elastic
is
would be flatter.
Elastic. Okay, elastic. Benar. Betul ya, steeper. Somebody said
elastic flatter, sir.
somebody said
flatter.
elastic.
Elastic is
Somebody changed their mind. Or another person said. Okay, somebody say
My mistake, sorry.
no, it's okay. That's how you learn. Now we say this is elastic. So which one is which? Which one is correct? Elastic flatter or elastic steeper?
Elastic flatter.
Elastic flatter.
Flatter, kan? So the way to do it is this. Now, what is elasticity? Elasticity of demand is equal to what? Is equal to the percentage change in the quantity demanded divided by percentage change in the price. Okay? So now, if you want to see whether it is steeper or not steeper, or flatter, you will just look at the change in the Q. Okay? Now, if it is inelastic, we just call it perfectly inelastic. Perfectly inelastic demand. What is the value of the elasticity if it is perfectly inelastic? Inelastic demand. What is the value of the elasticity? Perfectly inelastic. Not 1.
0.
-1.
No.
-1.
No. That is unitary elastic. Ini perfectly inelastic. Cepat, anybody? It's not 1. It's not negative 1. Should be what?
infinite, sir.
Infinite pun bukan. Apa lagi? There is one more left.
0.
0. Okay, perfectly inelastic. The elasticity demand is 0. 1% increase in the price the demand doesn't change. Okay, so that will be equal to the percentage change in the quantity divided by percentage change in the price. Whatever the price increase or decreases, the quantity doesn't change. So it is perfectly inelastic. Okay, doesn't matter what the price is, or the price increase or the price decrease, the demand doesn't change. Okay, so we call it inelastic demand. Normally the price will increase lah. Okay, because normally the price will go up, due to the inflation or due to the tax. So the price increases, the change in the Q is zero, no change. So if there is no change in the Q, all right, we go back to the diagram. So you don't have to remember whether it's flatter or not flatter. You just remember inelastic, the coefficient is zero. That means there is no change in the Q. If there is no change in the Q, therefore, how does the demand function look like if there is no change in the Q at all?
Vertical.
It will be vertical. So the demand function is vertical. So that is perfectly inelastic. So therefore, the more inelastic the demand curve is, the function will be what? More steeper. Okay. So here the steeper should be what? Inelastic. Okay, inelastic demand. So you just remember lah, you start with the perfectly inelastic. The demand is what? Coefficient is zero. That means price increases, the quantity doesn't change. So that means your demand function will be vertical. So you can draw it from there. Inelastic demand, the curve will be what? Steeper. Okay, steeper relative to what we were drawing. And then elastic, perfectly elastic. What is the value of the elasticity? That is too extreme. One is zero. What is the other one?
Infinity.
Infinity. If the demand is perfectly elastic, all right, perfectly elastic, that means the demand function is horizontal, like that. Okay. So in other words, if I increase the price, okay, infinity means I've increased the price, the quantity will change infinitely. All right. Or in other words, one way to do it, okay, one way to relate to that would be perfectly elastic. Okay, perfectly elastic demand. The coefficient is infinity. So when you have infinity, that means percentage in the Q over the change in percentage in P is equal to whatever the change in the Q divided by zero. Okay, anything divided by zero, you will have infinity value. So therefore, the demand function is horizontal. Okay, horizontal demand. All right. So in other words, the change in the Q will not be affected by the change in the price. The price remains the same, but Q can change any amount. Okay, so it is horizontal. So the more elastic the demand is, the function or the demand line would be more horizontal. Okay, more flatter. So that is elastic. So now, having understand that thing, we can discuss. Okay, we can discuss how does elasticity affect the excess burden of the tax and also the incidence of the tax. All right. So let us start. I will draw another diagram because that diagram is already fully loaded. So let us begin with a normal demand function, supply function. So that is our demand function. That is the I was scared. That is the supply function. Okay, that is our supply function. Call here D0. All right. S doesn't change anything. Okay, now we impose the tax. All right, you impose the tax on the firm. So you got here S1, and then that will give us this point here is E0, E1. Ini come, this diagram would be loaded. PC, P0, PF, Q0, Q1. Okay. Now, suppose, all right, we know this is a normal situation, the initial situation. Now, suppose now the demand is more inelastic. Okay, more inelastic. So when the demand more inelastic relative to D0, how does the new line look like? Steeper or flatter?
Steeper.
Steeper. Okay, so we draw the demand function steeper. Okay, suppose D is more inelastic, that means the D1 will be steeper than D0. Okay, so that's how the curve look like. But having said that, you must know elasticities is actually different at any point. Okay, actually your demand is steeper, the demand is flatter, the elasticities will be different at any point. Some point will be elastic, some point inelastic. So we have to understand that. Okay, now the steepness of the demand function just to give you idea, okay, on the elasticity. But actually elasticity is different at every point. Okay, so now steeper. I draw the graph. Okay, I draw the line. So I want you to draw because I want you to get the conclusion. So we draw a steeper D. Okay, must pass through E0 because you want to make the comparison. Steeper. Macam tu. All right. Now, what I would like you to do, I want you to compare. Oh no, not compare lah. But first of all, you will get the new equilibrium under the more inelastic demand. Okay, get the equilibrium. I want you to do it on your graph. I want you to draw the graph. I want you to do it, put your E2, okay? Call it E2. That means now this is D1, okay? More steeper than the demand function initially D0. So get the equilibrium, E2. Okay, everybody got that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So equilibrium E2, where D1, okay, equal to S1, where S1 is, of course, you get the MC plus the tax, okay? And of course, that is the tax. So you got E2. E2 should be here. E2 should be here. Everybody got that? All right. So now, show the price, the new price, PC, and then the new price for the firm. Okay, you got E2. Now, what is P? The new equilibrium. Okay, the new P, the new consumer price. Yeah, I think consumer
PC1.
price.
It will
Consumers.
be above PC.
You will see that the new consumer price, okay, is above PC. We call that. I use
PC1.
another color. Ni point ni kan? Okay, you got PC. So that is the new PC. We call it PC1. Okay? All right. P0 is still there. Okay? So consumer price is P equal to PC1. Okay? All right. Now, what is the new price the firm will get?
In between PF and P0.
You will get the new price the firm get.
Higher.
Of course, the one after take care of the tax would be the price on the old ship supply. So that point, so that would be PF. Okay, call it PF1. Okay, good. So now, first, so the price, the firm's price, P equal to PF1. But you see here, the T is still equal to PC1 minus PF1. Okay, the tax is equal to, macam tadi 25 cents is still 25 cents. But now, I want you to look at the burden of the tax on the consumers compared to the one where the demand function is D0.
Higher burden.
Higher burden. Okay, so if you look at this thing here, you will see the PC, okay, minus P0, PC1 to minus P0 is bigger than PC minus P0. So higher burden on the firms. I'm sorry, on the consumers. So that means higher burden on consumers. Okay. Now, what about the burden of the tax on the firms? Now, the firm price is PF1. So what is the burden of the tax on the firms?
Lesser.
Will be less. Okay. You'll see here P0 minus PF1 is smaller than P0 minus PF. Okay. So you'll see the P0 minus PF1 is smaller than P0 minus PF. So in other words, lower burden of the tax on the sellers or on firms. Okay. All right. Now we want to, anybody has a question? So the more inelastic the demand is, given the supply function, higher burden will go to whom? Higher burden of the tax will go to whom?
Consumer.
Go to the consumers. So it makes sense, okay? Intuitively, it makes sense because the demand is inelastic. The price goes up, the demand doesn't change that much, okay? So the higher burden of the tax will go to the firm. Okay, now look at the excess burden. What can you say about the excess burden? When the demand is more inelastic compared to when the demand was D0.
For both, excess burden to consumer and producer is lower. Wait.
Okay, before you reach to that, okay, if the excess burden for the firm is smaller, the excess burden to the consumers is also smaller. Is that right? So what about the excess burden? Total.
Smaller.
Smaller. Okay. So you will see the excess burden will be smaller. So excess burden smaller. So you look at the diagram, okay? I will not draw into the diagram because it make things so messy. But I can label it EB1 is less than EB, the one that is initially the excess burden. And of course, when the excess burden is smaller, you got smaller excess burden on the consumers, okay? Also, smaller excess burden on the firms. But point is, total excess burden would be less. Okay? So the burden would on the consumers will be higher. Excess burden will be less. Now, why excess burden is smaller? Because as you recall, excess burden is equal to what? Half T times what? Change in the Q. So the T doesn't change. T is still 0.25, you know, like what we were having earlier. The one that changed is delta Q. The more inelastic the demand, the change in Q is smaller. Okay, so therefore, excess burden is smaller. Because what? Because the change in the Q is now lower. Okay, so when the change in the Q is lower, you will see excess burden will be lower. So we show it at in the diagram. Okay, so if you have a good diagram, you shade the excess burden. Okay, you see here smaller. Okay, everybody understand? Okay, good. Now this is very important. All right. What about, this is the second situation. What about if the demand is perfectly elastic, inelastic? Now the elastic demand is equal to 0. Okay. Now perfectly inelastic demand. The demand, how does it look like? Okay, I want you to include, okay, another demand function. Perfectly inelastic. Okay, everybody got it? Not everybody lah. Some people got it. If the
Yes,
demand
sir.
is perfectly inelastic, how does the demand function look like?
Vertical.
Horizontal line.
Horizontal ke vertical?
Horizontal.
Mana pula horizontal? Perfectly inelastic.
Oh, perfect.
Vertical, sir.
Vertical. Now you draw one diagram, okay, one line that passes through E0 because you want to make comparison to D0 only. Okay? Vertical demand function. So you label again PC, okay, consumer price. P0 dah ada. And then you label also PF, call it PF2. So what can you say about the changes in the consumer price and the firm price?
Consumer price increase. The firm price is the same. Oh my goodness. The firm price is at P0 eh. There's an intersection. How do we do this? So
Betul lah tu. So you will see, okay, if you draw it correctly, vertical line passing through E0, you will see the P0 now is equal to the PF. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
PF2, you label PF2 is just P0. And then PC will be much higher. So if I
Yes.
draw it vertical line, here, call it D2, okay? So perfectly inelastic, call it D2. So as you can see, consumer price now is that, okay? Call it E3, yeah? Okay, call it E3. So that is our consumer price. All right, I call it PC2. And the PF, okay, P0 is there, okay, P0 is still there. And it now happened that P0 or PF2 is that one. So that is also PF2. All right. So now, the increase in the price is still PC minus PF, okay, or P1 minus P0, or now, in other words, PC2 minus PF2. Now, what is the burden of the tax on the firm? Or what is the burden of the tax on the consumers?
Consumer increase the burden of the tax increase to the consumers, but there is no burden on the firms.
There is no burden of the tax on the firm because
P not equals to
PF2,
PF.
P0 minus PF2 is what? Is zero.
Zero.
Good. So if you look at that thing, okay, if the demand is perfectly inelastic, vertical demand function, you will see that, okay, you go back to the diagram, you label the diagram, okay, I will start from here. T is equal to what? T is equal to PC2 minus P0 plus P0 minus PF2. Now, as you can see, PF2 is equal to P0. So therefore, what? Therefore, this thing here is equal to 0. So the tax will be just equal to PC2 minus P0. So here we say full burden of the tax on whom?
Consumer.
On consumers. And then no burden, okay? No burden on the firms because the firm or the increase in the price, all right, will just be increase in the consumer's price. Okay, so the increase in the market price will just be equal to the increase in the consumer's price paid. So the full burden of the tax will be on the consumers. Now, what about the excess burden? You go back to the diagram. What about the excess burden?
Zero.
Excess burden is 0. Okay, so here you see the excess burden is 0. So therefore, from this discussion, you can make the conclusion. All right. So our conclusion will be what? As the demand function, as the demand become more inelastic, okay, more inelastic. So the demand function becomes more steeper. All right. As the demand function become more inelastic, not increase. Okay, become more inelastic given the supply. Okay, given supply means the normal supply. Then number one, what can you say about the excess burden?
Decrease.
Decrease. Okay, excess burden decrease. So when excess burden decrease, you will see, you can discuss about the distribution of the excess burden. All right. Okay, number two. The distribution, or no, the incidence of the tax, the distribution of the burden of the tax.
Consumer will have to
The
pay
consumers,
more. Yeah.
okay, the incidence of the tax or the burden of the tax will be higher on whom? On the consumers. Okay, the burden of the tax on the consumers, okay, will be increased. And the burden of the tax on the firms will decrease. If it goes to perfectly inelastic, okay, become more inelastic. Okay, more inelastic, the excess burden will be smaller, the burden on the consumers will be higher as well. Now, when it becomes perfectly inelastic, the excess burden now becomes 0. Okay, that means no excess burden of the tax because there is no change in the Q. And then what? And then full burden on whom? On the consumers.
Consumer.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anybody has question on this one? So that is this one. Okay. So as the demand become more inelastic, you will see this outcome. So sometimes, when you impose the tax, the burden of the tax on the firm and on the consumers will be different. When you see the burden of the tax is more on the consumers, then we have idea. The demand is quite inelastic. All right. So like what we were discussing earlier, the tax, the burden on the consumers is 15 cents. The burden on the firms is just less than cents. The demand is quite inelastic. Okay. All right. So now let's go the other way around. Okay, just to increase our understanding. Now we look at the situation number 2. The demand now, okay, demand more elastic relative to D0. Okay. Now, if the demand is more elastic relative to D0, if I go back to the diagram, how does the demand function look like? More elastic.
More flatter.
More flatter. Okay. So by now, I think you are already expert. I would like you to draw another diagram because this diagram is for inelastic. Okay. So you draw another diagram. D0 you maintain as a regular demand function macam ni lah. And then what you do, you impose the tax. So S now S1, you impose the tax, you get the equilibrium E0. E0 lah, E1, E0 yang mula-mula tu. And then you put the demand function flatter than D0, just like what we were doing. Put one flatter. And then number 2, the demand is perfectly elastic. You put a horizontal demand function, and then you'll see how does, okay, what happened to the excess burden and what happened to the burden of the tax on the firms and also on the consumers. Okay, we have 10 more minutes. I want you to do it. Okay, I gave you 5 minutes. So do that now. Repeat our discussion here. Okay, but you look at the case where the demand function is more elastic. All right, so more elastic, that means the demand function, the elastic demand is equal to infinity. You have a flatter demand, all right, relative to D0. Okay, do it now. Hello.
Yes.
Okay. Main kat sana.
Alina, tahu lah. Alina tahu lah. Alina tak ada.
Pergi main kat sana. Atau ada kerja. Atau ada meeting ni. Okay. Anybody who get some conclusion?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So you call that point, okay? We do, because since you are doing another diagram, you can call that point E2 lah. Okay. Otherwise, kita nak buat E4, E5, E2. And then you see that is the PC, call it PC1 again. Okay, so that is PC1. All right. Or the new consumer price. P0 is still there. And then that is the tax. So that is PF1. All right. Okay, number one. What about the burden of the tax relative to D0 on the consumers?
Lower.
Lower.
The burden of the tax on the consumers will be lower. Is that right? Because if you look at this thing here, PC1 minus P0, because that is our reference point, P0, PC1 minus P0 is less than PC minus P0. So less burden of the tax on the consumers. Now, what about the burden of the tax on the firm?
Much higher.
Be higher. Okay. You'll see P0 minus PF1 is bigger than P0 minus PF. Okay. So if you have a more elastic demand function, so we do it the first thing first. Number one, you will see here the higher the burden, okay, higher burden of the tax on the firms and less or lower, okay, lower burden on the consumers. Okay, lower burden. I missed the word here, burden. So you look at the T, okay, the T. T is equal, or you don't have to look at the T. Of course, we know that T is equal to PC minus PF, and then you break it out. So now we just look at the components. All right. So the burden of the tax on the firms, on the firms now, PF1 minus P0. I'm sorry, P0 minus PF1. P0 minus PF1 is bigger than P0 minus PF. Okay, so we are comparing the equilibrium E2 with E0. Okay, and of course E2, okay, because you are making the change in the price. And if you draw the diagram, you can see it directly. So the burden on the firm will increase. So the argument is the burden on the firm, P0 minus PF1 is higher than P0 minus PF. So the burden on the firm is better. And the lower burden on the consumers, we see the argument from here. The burden on the consumers, you'll see that PC1 minus P0 is less than PC minus P0. is the opposite of the one that we were doing earlier. All right. So that's our argument. Now, number 2, you look at the excess burden. Compare the excess burden now, okay, D1, and the excess burden under D0.
It's larger.
It's larger? Is it larger?
Yeah, it increases.
So the excess burden is higher. All right. So now, when you know the excess burden is higher, you look at the change in the Q. If you look at the change in the Q, you will see the decrease in the Q is larger. Call it Q2. Okay. So secondly, the excess burden is increased. Why the excess burden is increased? Because we know the excess burden is equal to the half multiplied by T multiplied by delta Q. And then you'll see here delta Q is increased. All right? Because Q2 minus Q0, absolute value. Of course, you see a negative value, you know, if negative value, higher negative value, the smaller one. But you look at the absolute value is larger, or the decrease is larger. The Q2 minus Q0 is larger than Q1 minus Q0. Or just say the decrease is larger. Okay, the decrease in the Q is larger, so excess burden will be larger. Okay, all right. So let us go to the extreme. Suppose the demand is perfectly elastic. Okay, perfectly elastic.
Horizontal demand.
Demand is horizontal. Okay, demand is equal to infinity. Horizontal. So now kita buat orang kata you draw the demand function horizontal. We just do it by observation. Okay, because you can finish up your analysis at home. So if the demand is horizontal, call it D2. Okay, number 1. What is the burden of the tax on the consumers?
No burden on the consumers.
There is no burden on the consumers. Okay, because you see here PC2, call it PC2 is equal to P0. There is no increase in the price. So the firm will bear no burden of the tax. But who will pay the burden of the tax? The firm. Is that right?
The firms.
The firm will bear the full burden of the tax. Okay, now, how do you get your excess burden?
Infinity.
Excess burden. Macam mana kita nak kira? Excess burden is this triangle. Betul tak?
Yes, sir.
That triangle. Okay. So in other words, the excess burden would be what? Would be bukan. Salah. Mana excess burden? Saya salah tu excess burden tu. What is the right excess burden?
Infinity, sir.
Itulah masalah dia. Because I do express. So you cannot do express, you know. You have to do the equilibrium. Saya main agak tadi. Okay, what is E2? Where is E2? E3 lah. E2 we already get. E3 mana? Sini kan? You got that E2? You got the equilibrium? Equilibrium
Yes.
Call it E3.
Yes, sir.
E3 kan? So that's why you show that P0 is equal to PC2. No burden of the tax on the consumers. The full burden of the tax will be on the firms. So PF2. And the excess burden is not that triangle. The excess burden is this triangle. So excess burden will be larger. Okay? So excess burden will be larger, not 0. So if it is perfectly elastic, all right, I think I will continue here. if the demand is perfectly elastic. That means you do your analysis. Okay, look at the changes in the price. Full burden on whom? On firms. All right, burden on the consumers, 0. So no burden on consumers. Excess burden will be increased further. So here will be the largest. Okay, the largest excess burden. Then it cannot be more than that, lah. You know, because now the demand function is horizontal. So what is our conclusion? As the demand becomes more elastic, okay, given the supply function, what happened to the burden of the tax on the firms and on the consumers? Burden of the tax on the consumers will be what?
Lesser.
Will be lesser,
Until
will be
0.
lower. Okay, and higher burden, or the higher burden of the tax will be on whom? The higher
Firms.
the burden of the tax, the higher the burden of the tax on the firms. And the excess burden would increase. Okay, and of course it increased to the maximum. So if you look at the first analysis, as the demand become more inelastic, the higher the burden on the consumers, or the higher the burden of the tax is on the consumers, lower burden on the firms. And the excess burden will become what? Will become less and less. Perfectly inelastic, 0. So here, as the demand become more elastic, the higher the burden of the tax on whom? On the firms. Smaller the burden on the consumers. And the excess burden will keep on increasing until it reach a maximum, where the demand is perfectly elastic. All right? So I want you to understand the difference, okay? Contrast. Okay, make the contrast, because that will have implication. Okay, implication on your system, or a system of taxation. What kind of good you want to tax? Okay, what kind of good you want to tax more? All right, what good you want to tax more? And what kind of good that you want to tax less? So we will continue from that. So that one I will continue next class. So what we have done, okay, what we have done, we look at the book. That would be up to page, actually, I jumped a little bit, you know. So the one that we are discussing now is on the page 417, okay, 417, 416, like that. The 415, I think it started from 415 up to 418, okay. The relationship of the tax, or the incidence of the tax on the elasticity. Okay, so that is on 415, 416, 417. And after this, we are going to continue. We are going to see, you know, for some further analysis, what kind of good that will be implied by what we were doing now. Okay, all right. Anything else? Anything? Any comment? Any question? Good. All
Sir,
right.
in the final,
Apa? Tanya final lah, lagi final. Okay.
nak tanya if we use colors to shade the region,
If
because
you use color sheet region, when you send to me, I don't see any color lah. You know, unless you are using a color printer. So for me, I can use color because I'm not going to send to you. I just draw it here, so you can see the different colors. But for you, if we have a face-to-face exam, then the coloring help. But you use color for your own benefit. You use a different color, you know, you understand better. But of course, when you send to me, the color is gone. But you can use a different color. That's good, actually.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right. Okay, I'll see you again. Have a nice. Today is what? Tuesday. I thought today is Thursday already. You know, our semester we have 3 more weeks. Okay, so the break is just a few days. Everything is you know compact. So you must work harder. Okay, don't stop now. All right. So I'll see you again. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you,
Thank
Doctor.
you, sir.
Okay,
sir.
thank you. I'll see you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.